Welcome to People Love Process. Creating graphic designs is more than knowing how to use the software. Developing your skills of observation and visual deduction are of equal or even greater importance in the process of crafting your design, whether they are logos, icons, or any motif for that matter. For example, logos, by their very nature, lean towards a simplified aesthetic. This is true because they need to communicate with an audience quickly in most real-world interactions. So when you're faced with creating a graphic design that requires the use of a complex theme, you have to learn to iconify it. Now, my favorite graphic designer of all time is legendary designer Saul Bass, and he said it well when he defined logo design as the ability to symbolize and summarize. I love that quote. So in this movie, I want to explain how to analyze reference images and visually deduce graphic representations of them for any design context, or maybe a better way of stating it, will condense visual shapes into various degrees of simplified forms. This is better shown than explained, of course, so let's take a look at how we can create a symbolic design that summarizes reality. So the first thing I want to go over is what's called visual deduction. This isn't hard. So let's take a look at a reference we're going to be using. Here's a nice little image of I guess you can call him a hipster. He has an epic mustache, styled beard. Man, I could never grow my beard that nice. Nice hair, pair of glasses. And if you were approaching this, you're always thinking in style when you're working in design, and that style is going to be appropriate for whatever company, product, or service or industry you're creating it for. But let's say this is within the men's hair industry, whether it's grooming or whether it's getting your hair that is shaved, whatever. That's the context of, let's say, what we're going to be working on right now. And we're looking at this reference because we want to create an iconic image based off of this type of character. But obviously, it's a photograph. We're not going to use that in a logo. That's not what you do. Now, I'm going to turn on a few layers here because I did initial drawing. This is the iconic version where I simplified shape and form, then I build those shapes, and then I created the black and white base artwork. Now, I only walked you through those two levels because I have them included for the next two iterations of visual deduction. So if you look at this graphic we created, this is what I would call an iconic design. Iconic meaning it definitely represents this character, but it doesn't have to look exactly like the character. We're picking up on attributes of this photograph and then simplifying and deducing those complex forms, such as his hair, which has a lot of different pieces of his hair, and if you did it realistically, it'd be very complex. We didn't even follow the same shape. We just made a reference to the hair here at the top. Or his glasses. Yes, he's wearing glasses, but we're not really showing his eyes. His eyes in our iconic image are just dots reversed out of shapes that are glasses. The epic part of the icon is his mustache, much like the photograph. But is that even exact to what his mustache really is? No, it doesn't have to be. This is where artistic license comes into play. But we can derive a design by looking at the real world and then simplifying shape and form to create what we need here. His beard communicates his beard, but it's not exactly like the one in the photograph. It doesn't have to be. So this would be how you could visually deduce from complex to simple using visual deduction skills like that to create an iconic design. But that might not be the style you want. Maybe you want to create something that's more stylized, more proportionate to the real world. And that's what this one is. But even in this kind of take graphically, as you approach a subject matter, there's things you might decide that aren't even important enough to include, like we didn't include his nose. We don't really need it. The focus is on his mustache. It's more closely shaped to what's shown in the photograph, but not exact once again. And his beard doesn't really look like this, but it represents in an iconic way, or a stylized way, that is, his beard. A photograph is literal. You see a photograph, and if you created exactly what the photograph shows, it won't always translate well in a graphic sense because photographs are very forgivable. We're looking to create what I would call idealistic graphics. Does it have all the complexity and detail of a photograph? No, doesn't need it. We've decided to leave out the nose. We even left out the eyes. That might be something you might want to include. In this case, I didn't. So this just shows how I took those forms into consideration. Once again, it has a little more detail than the previous iconic version, and it's definitely more proportionate to realism proportions, not kind of not cutesy isn't the right word, but if we go back and look at the icon, this one's not proportionate to the real world. This one is. It's a little more stylized, a little more contemporary, if you want. Let's go ahead and take a look at the third. And the third one is what I would classify as illustrative design. It's far more illustrative. And depending on the context of use, it might work good for a logo. In this case, it might just be a promotional graphic they want to use on a direct mail or something. But in this case, it has more detail. It's obviously closer stylized to the reference image here, but once again, not exact. We took a little bit of liberty to simplify everything, so it's working in a one-color black and white. But we can also go in on something like this and add a level of detail without getting overly complex with it, where we add a little shading in it. So that's how you can use reference to kind of, based off of whatever, once again, whatever your company, product, service, whatever industry it is, you might think of a good photographic element that would be great reference to help you come up with a design for your client and for your project. So it's all about looking at the complex, looking at, in this case, a photograph, and then deciding how much you want to deduce or visually deduce from that photograph to come up with the design you're trying to create. Iconic, stylized, or maybe it's more illustrative in nature. Now, the one I really liked the most was the iconic one, this one. And actually, my daughter, Savannah, worked with me on all of these, and she did most of the work on the icon one in the drawing stage. So I just built it out. So she's really good at capturing that essence that really works well. And in this case, I think it works well for the final mark. So this is just everything I'm showing you here is just to help you kind of get comfortable with what this is all about. I'll show you the practical aspects of actually building out a design using these principles, but it's important to understand the principles before we do that. Because once again, anybody can learn software. And this has nothing to do with software. This is everything you have to do outside the box before you jump on the box and try to create it. So it's important to kind of understand the importance of these skills and how to put them to use once you're inside of Illustrator. So let's take a look at some examples. You might look at an image, in this case, of a horned owl, and the feathers at the top of the head, which almost look like ears on an owl. We kind of represent those over here. So my graphic doesn't really match the photo in any way. I'm just picking up on those attributes that make an owl and translating it into a graphic motif that communicates the same thing. Nobody would look at this and not see an owl. So that's all we're talking about. And here's another one. It's a fox, and we had to create some directions for, I believe this was a marketing firm. And one of the directions is they wanted to go or explore was a fox as their brand mark. So we did several iterations of that. You can see here on the left. And obviously, color plays a part in this at some point. And a fox is kind of that orangish brown color. So we kind of settled on orange for when the brand colors in this direction. But it's all about taking complex. You can imply hair like on the back here, but you don't have to get all that detail in there. It's about looking at the complex and deducing shape and form in a more simpler way to pull off a motif. Here's another one. I love doing rhino graphics. I've happened to be able to work on several projects where I got to do that. I pulled these examples from 3 different projects. But once again, all of them communicate rhino, but they all have a little different flair and uniqueness to them of their own. So that's all I'm talking about. And one thing I'll say now and kind of substantiate with something I'm going to show you in a little bit is that if you don't have a client come to you and ask for something like this, just practice. That's all you do is pick a theme you like, you enjoy, and give this a shot. See how you can deduce from complexity. Does it look exactly like a rhino in real life? Well, no, not really. I'm not showing all this plating. I'm kind of implying it in this one here, but it doesn't have to. So it's all about just practicing it, because the more you do it, the better you get. Let's take a look at another one. Here's an octopus. They're just one of the coolest creatures in nature. But here's 2 iconic representations, 2 completely different projects. The top one was for a creative firm, and the bottom one was kind of a tech business. So we took his tentacles and made them kind of circuits, which works really well. So if you remember the concept math video I did, all of these tactics we're going over in this movie kind of go with that. And we put that to use concept math to figure out, hey, we could take those tentacles and make them circuitry looking elements. So a lot of these things I go over in each movie all work together within the context of creativity. So don't isolate them and think they only apply to one thing. You can apply these to so many different areas of creativity and design. Here was a different project. Years ago, I used to work for Upper Deck back in the late 90s, and then for about until 2010, until they kind of had some issues with their company, I freelanced with them for 10 years. And at that time, they were doing role-playing games. They had a gaming division. This was the game, I believe it was called Hunt Tech. And they had these really good fantasy artists that would sketch out a concept for a painting they were going to do, like this one, and then the creative director would give me that sketch, and then I had to create an iconic avatar icon in one color that they could use on the back of the card in the layout they were doing. And this just shows you one of those here. This was the sketch I had to work from. I did most of these in a symmetric fashion just because it made it go faster. But this is how I simplified those form and shapes. Fantasy is always a fun one to work with. Here's a bunch of other ones from that same set. Not all of them were symmetric, though. Like this one up here, don't even remember what that really was, some kind of bird creature. And then the dragon, the bottom left. All the other ones here are symmetric. But that was a fun project to work on. But it all comes down to simplifying shape and form from complexity to a more simple form. This applies to any kind of logo design. So you can take a photograph, you can study it, see what attributes that make an eagle an eagle, deduce those down in simplified forms to come up with a motif. In this case, it was for a leather crafter. So 2 of the objects or goods that he uses all the time are these large kind of beefy needles and this kind of thread that's kind of really thick thread. And that's what he does the sewing when he's putting together custom wallets and everything else he creates. And so it's not just iconifying from nature in this case, but iconifying real world objects and figuring out how to pull that off in simple shapes and forms that make up the inner part of this shield. Now, I don't even have this project on my site yet. I'm still waiting for the guy who does the leather work to get some nice photographs done of his product so I can showcase that in context of the logo. But this is the brand system that we put together for him. It was a really fun project to work on, and eventually it'll be up on my site. Let's jump into another one. This goes back to Upper Deck. If you're not familiar with Upper Deck, they're just trading cards, sports trading cards, baseball, football, basketball. They did hockey. They even did NASCAR, although I don't really consider NASCAR a sport. But that said, they would provide me with source photos, in this case, NFL Hall of Famer Dick Butkus, and I had to simplify these and do it pretty quick because their budget wasn't huge for each one. Created the black and white artwork you can see here, nested it within a shape, used the team colors, and these were turned into embroidered patches that were used on the cards. That was a really fun project. So if this kind of intimidates you, I don't want you to be intimidated, because anything new, if you're not used to it, you haven't tried it before, is always going to be intimidating. That's normal. Fear in that respect is part of the creative process. So don't let that hold you back. You just want to figure out and draw out your design before you try to build it. Now, whenever I'm creating a design like this, I don't work from the ether. I'm not pulling it out of my head. I use reference. The best drawers in the world, if you think about it, are at Disney, and they use reference all the time, whether they go to an animal park, whether they pull up Google Images. That's just the real world. That's how it's done. In this case, I use stock photography, and this is the image I looked at to kind of create this. Now, I want to demonstrate what I mean by visual deduction. How do you deduce shape and form? Well, it's easier by diagramming it. So if you look at these shapes, this is all I did. I looked at the top part of his head and how the shadowing kind of ran down like this. Was it exactly like that? No. There's a lot of artistic license here. But it's looking at a photograph like this, looking at how the shading goes, and then figuring out how to map that shape, or in this case, draw that shape, which I've done here, and that's going to help you figure it out. Now, if you look at his horns, all the horns of, in this case, of a ram, have these little kind of grooves in their horn. It goes all the way around and the bottom of their horn. You can see some of it right here as well. Well, those grooves are a characteristic that's common to them, but would you want to put this much detail in this case, a brand mark? No. So what I did is I figured out a way to iconify it. I figured out a way to simplify form and shape and made these little cut ends, and that's what I drew out over here. So that's all it is. It's looking at complexity, simplifying it down to elegant and simplified shapes and forms. And in many cases, a lot of these things can be built with simple shapes as you move to vector, as you start creating it. So once I figure out my drawing, this is my refined sketch that I built upon, and this is the final design, how it came out. Now, I kind of alluded to this before, but the best place to improve these skills isn't to take a real-world client project and just try it for the first time. I wouldn't recommend that. I would recommend you practicing. So pick a theme you like. It can be anything. I like sci-fi. I grew up with Star Wars. I enjoy Star Wars. I enjoy making parody designs of Star Wars, in this case, an Imperial Troopers PTSD support group. And that's all it is. I didn't try to illustrate it in or create a graphic of a stormtrooper that was realistic. I just used it as a way to simplify and create a simplified design and motif that I could use, in this case, for a sticker design. So This is how you need to, this is how you can practice. Just pick whatever theme, whatever topic matter you enjoy. It doesn't have to be sci-fi. It could be anything. It could be an animal you like. And just put visual deduction to the test. Try it for yourself. Force yourself to think simple and kind of deduce from complexity down to simple shapes and keep working at it. Once again, the more you do it, the easier it's going to become. Now, I also want to go over what I call iconifying complex shapes. Now, in much the same fashion, visual deduction is a way to think and process. And I kind of showcase that with the RAM, how you look at something, you think about it, and then you figure out what shapes those are going to be. So it's more about the thinking end of the creative process. Iconifying complex shapes is actually, okay, fine. Well, once you think through that process, how do you move forward and actually build it in Illustrator? That's what we're going to do now. So again, you can take any theme, any kind of complex item, in this case, a brain. A brain's pretty complex if you've ever seen a photograph of one, but you can still iconify something that complex and turn it, in this case, to a one-color graphic. Maybe it's a cow. A cow is pretty complex, especially with all of its spots on it and all the other detail a cow has. Now, do you need to include all of that if you're creating a brand mark, in this case, for Dairy West? No. But you want to look at a cow to get those attributes right. Like this one didn't even have horns. We put horns on them when most of the milk cows don't have horns. Why? Because it communicates a cow better having those horns on. And we did one style where it's more proportionate to how the cow's head is. We did another one that's very geometric shaped. You can notice we kind of worked in as a spot, a drop representing milk, since this was kind of a coalition that represents the Western Hemisphere of the United States and the dairy industry. Here's one where I simplified it even down more into simple flat colors, and the cow's looking back. Since it's Dairy West, he's looking west. And then anytime you're working and you're creating something, other ideas are going to come up at times that have nothing to do with what you're working on, but they're a great idea nonetheless. So don't ignore those. Try to capture it and set it aside and come back to it later. So I was creating cows and working on cows, and then I thought of the term holy cow. So I just took some of the elements I had created for the directions for this project and just created this. Now, I didn't show this to the client. Maybe I should have, because they didn't go for any of my ideas, actually. Well, I take that back. They did go for one idea, but maybe I should have showed them the holy cow idea. But anyway, anybody needs holy cow, I got a holy cow graphic. Let's take a look at one more. Now, I live in Oregon. There's all kinds of hazelnut farms all around here. And this shows what an actual hazelnut looks like when it's on the tree. I had no idea they look like this, because the only time I've ever looked at a hazelnut is when it's in a store and it doesn't have any of this detail to it. So you wouldn't want to kind of use the complexity in nature. You want to even simplify it. So this design direction, I branded Ash Creek Farms. Actually, they went with a different design, which I like just as much. But this was one of the directions I presented to them. And it represents what they grow at their farm, which are hazelnuts, but it's distinctly simplified and iconified from reality. So again, a lot of the same principles, but when you build it is what we're going to go over in just a second. I have a couple more examples. One of the hardest complex forms is your hand. Also, drawing feet are really hard as well. But here's a good practice for you. Just look at the hand and come up with iconic designs based off of hands and see how you can, what you can create doing that. That's all I did here. Here's in the world of icons. Icons, by their very nature, need to be, guess what? Iconic. Duh. That makes sense. This icon of the NCC 1701, this is the USS Enterprise. This icon was actually a Mac OS icon created by my friend Corey Maron. He's an amazing icon designer. He works for the Icon Factory, and I love the icons they do. I mean, these are just amazingly detailed. I created the exact same ship, but just made it a flat, one color, black and white icon. So it's about using the complex to inspire you to create the simplified. If you want to create this too, that's awesome as well. But when you're creating most iconic shapes and forms, you want to simplify it as much as you can. So we want to iconify complexity. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, lots of pine cones. We used to have pine cone wars, which were fun. You'd throw pine cones at each other and try to bonk somebody in the head. That was always, I was always looking for the green pine cones that weren't fully I don't know, grown isn't the right word, but they weren't fully dried out. And so they were pretty dense. And they're easier to throw. So they had, they whiz through the air and bonk somebody in the head. Sorry, sidetrack there. Let's get back on target. Okay. I was working on a project where we were branding a small town in Louisiana. They wanted a pine cone, one of their design directions to work in. So we created this. Does it look exactly like a pine cone? Well, no, not really. But that's okay. It doesn't have to. It has to represent it. Doesn't have to be photorealistic. And so we're going to move into a complex form here, and we're going to create it. We're talking about pine cones, so why not do a pineapple? A pineapple is a pretty complex form when you look at it. All the detail on the body of the pine cone and on the top with all the leaves. And that's what we're going to tackle here. But does it actually need to be this complex? No. So if you think and visually deduce, this might be the sketch you come up with. Now, all my sketches, I use a flatbed scanner, scan it in, usually set it to about 20%, and I'm just going to go ahead and lock the layer, and we're going to build right on top of this. So we're going to zoom in here so you can see this really well. And you can see, does the shapes that I have for the leaves at top, is it as tall as what it was in the photograph? No, doesn't need to be. So all we're going to do is we're going to build out the detail in the top of the leaves. We'll even zoom in a little more, because what I want is I want to put gaps in between all of these. And so what I need to do, first I want to make a gap, and we'll go ahead and take these two elements here, like this. Actually, first, we're going to take these two and we'll clone it, Command-C, Command-F. Or actually, now that I think about it, we'll just select these two. We'll go to Object, we'll go to Path, we'll go to Offset. And we're going to just do this 4, not 10. That looks good. Now, whenever you do offset, when it comes to extreme point like this, Illustrator will get to this area which aligns with this end point, and then it'll just go straight. Instead of following this curve geometrically, which would go down like this, it doesn't do that. In this case, it's not going to affect our design. If it was going to affect the design, I would fix that, but I'm not going to fix that. I'm just going to leave it as is because it really doesn't matter at this point. So now that we have that, we're going to take this one and we'll also go offset on this one. Same setting like that. We're going to make a copy of their initial offset. Command-C, Command-F. I'll go ahead and fill it like that. We'll take this one. I'm going to fill this one as well. So we'll take all three we've filled here like that, and we'll go ahead and go to, where's our Pathfinder there? We'll go Unite. And all we're going to do here is, first, let's go ahead and snap. Make sure to have Smart Guides on, Command-U. I'll create what I call a throwaway shape just to edit this shape like that. Then we'll go ahead and copy this, Command-C, Command-F again. Go to the Reflect tool, find a central anchor point. Smart Guides makes that easy. Reflect that over, select both of these, unite. Now that this is on top of the top leaf, we'll go ahead and go minus front. Just to get that nice gap in there, we'll take these two here like this. We'll go ahead and fill these so you can see what I'm doing. And I'll go ahead and unite those. We'll select this one, and we'll just go minus front. So we're just building these gaps into our artwork. On this one, we can select this leaf. We'll go ahead and clone it, Command-C, Command-F, find a central anchor point with the Reflect tool here, flip that over. We'll go ahead and select these three, unite them, select the body of the pineapple. We'll offset this one the same amount, which is 4. Make sure this is on top. We can fill it, select this, and trim it to get that gap between the body and the leaves. And then we can just copy this one, Command-C, Command-F to clone it, select the Reflect tool, and move it over to the other side. So that's how I would create the crown of the pineapple with those leaves. Once again, is it as tall as the other one? No, it doesn't need to be. So that's all I'm doing here. Now, eventually, we'll go ahead and turn this off, and I'll turn this on. I go back, and like a good cooking show, I wasn't going to build all of these separate elements out like this, but I just went back and cut all these shapes in half like that. That's easy to do, but I'm not going to bother going through it. Now, at the time I created this was for a branding project, which they requested a pineapple, which I thought was a bit odd, but you know, that's what they wanted, so that's what I did. Now, at the time, if you look, we're going to zoom out even more here. I just used large elliptical shapes using the ellipse tool over here. This shape is on top of this shape, and I would select both, and then I go minus front like that to get a nice little wedge. In this case, I would create a throwaway shape, kind of like this, select the wedge we created, intersect it, just to get something like that. And that's fine. It worked. But there's an even easier way to do it now with plugins. Like, let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit. The plugin I would use for this now, if I was building this, I wouldn't do it that way now. I'd just go to the Arch by Points tool, which is part of Subscribe by Astute Graphics. And I would just click wherever I wanted to start here, and not going to create a circle. So we'll go over here. Maybe I wanted to start here, end here, click again, create one arch, click here, taper it like that. We can go ahead and switch back to the pen tool and close the shape, and I get that little wedge that way. So it doesn't matter if you don't have a plugin, just use elliptical shapes, because that's what I ultimately did originally. Let's go ahead and zoom out just a little bit, and I'll turn on this. You can see these shapes here. So I'm just going to select all of these. I'm going to go unite like that. Make sure you always turn it into a compound like there. Once I have those, I'll clone it, Command-C, Command-F. Once again, that's set up as my F3 key. Otherwise, you have to go up here all the time, go copy, go back up here, pull down, and go paste in front. Then might even have to go arrange, bring to front. So I have that all applied to the F3 key, 3 commands and 1 button push. It makes life go a lot faster. And I can just select this copy now, go to a central anchor point with the Reflect tool, and reflect it over. Now I have all of those areas that are going to kind of cut through that top shape. Let's go ahead and go to Pathfinder. We'll go ahead and unite these like that. And again, if you go to Appearance, you can see this is a compound, so we're okay there. And then I'm going to turn this layer on. These are all just that little detail to make it look more like a pineapple. So I'll just select these, select the detail we just fused together, unite all these with Pathfinder again. And this is now, let's go ahead and fill it again with blue. It's on top of the body. So I'll go ahead and select that. and I'll go minus front. We've just punched everything through like this. Notice it's going to revert to a group, so I make sure it's a compound. We don't need this outer line anymore. We can get rid of that. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select this. I'm going to snap it to a central anchor point. I'm creating another throwaway shape like this. Once I've created that, I'll select the pineapple. I'll clone both of these, Command-C, Command-F, and I'll go intersect. Then we'll take the original shape, making sure it's on top. I'll select the body of the pineapple, and I'll go minus front. Oops, my bad. If I select that, make sure it's on front. I'm on the wrong layer, so it'd help bring that up like that. Then select this and go minus front. So all I did there is I just turned these into two halves like that, just like I have the two halves on the leaves above. So now we'll just make sure, let's go ahead and move all these leaves up to this layer like that. We can turn off these, we can turn off our sketch, and this is where I'll turn on these because these are the brand colors we're going to color this with. Now, we're not using blue in the pineapple. We're just going to make this gold. This is another one of the brand colors on this project. So this is where you can just select all the shapes that are going to have the same color. So I'm going to select the right-hand side here and kind of like the shaded area on this side. Go to the eyedropper. We'll make those dark. This color will be a lighter shade of that same color. And this is where global colors come in because this is just a tint of this. And I'm going to go ahead and color the other side of the leaves like this. And then one side dark, the other side gets the tint. And that's how I would iconify this. Now, does this look just like a pineapple? Let's go ahead and zoom out. Not really. It doesn't look exactly like the photograph of the pineapple, but would anybody see this and go, I'm not sure what that is? No, they would see a pineapple. So it doesn't have to have all the detail. It can still be a bit ornate, but it doesn't need to reflect reality exactly. That's what iconifying is all about. So the final design context on this looked like this. And once again, you're going, wait a minute, Associates PC, what's that? Well, it was like a financial law firm. And they were in Florida. And for some reason, historically, ever since they existed, they've used a pineapple. So they wanted that. And this was one of the design directions I did for them. They ended up going with a different pineapple I created, but I always like this one as well. Let's take a look at another example of a complex form, a shrimp. Now, when you look at a shrimp, they're pretty small in reality, unless it's a jumbo shrimp, which is ironic by name, and you look at the characteristics on this and you decide, oh, okay, well, the body kind of goes straight and curves around. It has this little antenna that flares back, comes in kind of curlicues or twists and turns. It has a beady little eye, has legs here, and its body is kind of segmented. It has these lines running through it, and then it has a tail. So those are the things I want to keep in mind. Now, not everything you have to draw out ahead of time. In this case, this was for a friend of mine who needed an icon designed for some project he was working on. And he asked me if I'd create it. And I'd say, I'll take one whack at it. You don't have a budget, but if you like it, you can use it. Don't worry about it. And I just want to show you, I didn't have time to draw this out and kind of figure it out. So I knew I was going to keep this simple. I was just going to use basic shapes. These are just elliptical shapes. Now, what I like to do is start with circles. The back kind of curves, so that's going to make up the back, but I need this to go straight. Well, this is why I use plugins like Dynamic Corners by Astute Graphics. Let's go ahead and open this, because it can even take a circle and find a corner. What do you mean by that? Well, I can just go ahead and pull a circle out like this. And then I can go ahead and pull a circle. Well, I don't want to pull that one out. We'll pull these out like this. So I've created these scallop shapes like that. That's all I'm doing here. And then actually, we'll go ahead and we'll pull out this one too, like that. And then I'll just direct select these, drag it over because I want this to be where it ends. This one is on top, so I want it to extend like that. Select both of them and just go minus front. So that's most of the body of the shrimp. Now, if you want to do the same thing using the native tools in Illustrator, so if we started with a square, let's say, go like this. Let's go ahead and sample this. I should probably just set this up in the file, but I didn't. So you could do the same thing in Illustrator if you just started with, well, that's the large one. Let's create another one based off of the smaller one, like that. Like that. So if you started with two square shapes in Illustrator and you don't have a plugin, you don't need it. Just start with squares. Once again, thinking in shapes is going to help you. Then all you have to do, just select these two corners, round it, select this corner, round it. Then this will be determined by whatever you want it to be. Let's say it's that long. This one here, a little longer, making sure that this one's on top of the other one, and you can get the same shape. So it's all about thinking in shapes. I start with circles because I tend to use the plugin more than I use the corner widget. I actually use both, but I just want to, I don't want you to think you can't do this unless you have a plugin. You can't. It'll just take a little longer. But just think in shapes. That makes the process a whole lot faster. Here's a case where I just use the corner widget and I round it because its face is kind of round there. Got the beady little eyes. That's going to work great. Let's go ahead and turn this on because if you think about the tail, and I have a certain concept I want to do here, and this is where I would use the corner widget. I would go ahead and select this corner, select this, and I just round those like that. I'd select these and this and round those. I go ahead and select all of them, unite it, and I've created a nice little heart shape that's going to work for this design. This is where, as I'm building, I might go back and do other rounds. So if I have this shape here, I might select the rounding tool. And by the way, you could use the corner widget you want. And I'd go back and I'd like round the end just because I think that looks better. You know, I might select this one and add a nice little round there as well. That kind of detailing always looks good. If you wanted to round the top part of the head here, you could if you wanted to. So that's how I create the tail. Now, this kind of goes with the concept I have in mind, which will make sense when I kind of show you that. But this is how I would approach building this. Now, all I want to do is get to a point where I have all my base vectors. So if I turn this on, you can see all these base vectors here. We have the shapes we initially created. We have the tail, but we can use strokes. This is where strokes really, in my opinion, comes in handy because I can go ahead and just select everything here that's these lines. And by the way, a lot of people think you have to use a pen tool to create lines. Well, you can use a line tool. It just goes a lot faster. In this case, that's what I use mostly, except for the legs over here. We're going to select these lines like this. We'll even select these, and we'll even select the antenna like this, all the lines that make that up. All of these, we're going to select a stroke size. In this case, I want it to be 12. So we'll go to 12. So we're working out how thick all these should be. Now, just so you can see this better, we're going to take these, which will be the segments of the body. We'll go ahead and color those blue so you can see them like that. And all of these now, I'm just going to take these and I'm going to go ahead and go Object, Path, Outline Stroke. We'll go ahead and unite it. Notice it's a group, so you want to make sure that's a compound. It's above the body of the shrimp. Select the body of the shrimp, and I'll go minus. So now we have all the gaps in the shrimp. All of these you want to make sure you have round cap turned on here, because we want the bottom to be rounded. We wouldn't want this, if we go up here, to be a flat cap, because it just doesn't look as elegant. We have other subtle rounds everywhere, and it'll just look better. So I'll take all of these as well, and this is where ultimately I want to expand things. So I'll go path, outline, stroke, like that, and I'll expand those. All of these here, I also want that round cap, so I'll turn round cap on, but also I don't want these to be perfect corners. So I'd select these anchor points, and this is where I go. I want their knees to be rounded, not sharp knees. Do shrimp have knees? I don't even know if shrimp, I don't know if that's what they call them, knees. That's what I'm going to call them. Up here, you can see we need to add a round up there, like that. And again, all of these I did separately because much like we created the shape of his body, it was either easier to create a shape like this and just copy it, rotate it to get this part going down here. That's why all these are separate. But all these, again, these will just, again, be outlined to stroke like that. And then we can just unite them, diffuse them into one shape. That's all we're going to do with these as well. Go back to object, path, outline, stroke. Now that we have all these elements, we just take all these elements like this together, and we'll go to Pathfinder. We'll go to Unite. Make sure it's a compound. Make sure the eye is on top so we can punch it through. Again, it's going to always revert to a group. That's why I have a keyboard shortcut to turn it to a compound. By the way, if you don't have the keyboard shortcuts, watch my keyboard shortcuts movie. It'll speed up your creative process. Otherwise, you always have to go here, pull down to here, and go make. Notice I have F7, so I never do this. I just hit F7. Now it's a compound. Now I can color it however I want. In this case, the shrimp's going to be this nice orange. So complexity of a real-life shrimp and iconifying it into a simple shape. Now, before I show you the final design, I do want to point something out. What's the difference between raw vector building and clean vector building? If you look at both of these, what's different between these two? Well, visually, there's nothing different. They're identically the same. But if I go over here and select it, notice these are still strokes. Nothing is built clean. Even though visually this is what you want it to look like, that's okay to build that way. But at some point, and I usually make a copy of my build file so I can always go back to this type of file and make tweaks if I need to. You want to build and deliver your art clean. I wouldn't want to send this one to the friend I created this for. I created it in a clean format like this, and that makes usage easier. So I just wanted to point that out. The final design on this one looked like this. International Shrimp Lovers Association. So that's why I turned the tail into a heart. And I believe it's Latin. Long live the Caridia. I might be mispronouncing that. And this style always works well and translates well onto a dark or colorized background. So developing the skill of visual deduction is one of the most valuable creative attributes you can have as a designer. It's also a skill that will only improve the more you use it. So if this type of work intimidates you, that's normal. Just once again, pick a topic matter you love and just practice with it. Some of my best work I've created initially scared the daylights out of me when I understood what I was creatively facing. That's normal. But when you pull it off, it's also extremely rewarding as well. So that's why you should do it. Visual deduction and iconifying complex shapes is a methodology that goes hand in hand with the design thinking method I shared with you in a previous movie on concept math. They all work together. The exercise files for each of the People of Process movies can always be accessed via the link in the description below. A big thank you to Kathleen Julian, who sent a super chat. I really appreciate that. Remember, members get bonus content and behind the scenes information. And if you simply subscribe, it also helps me continue to create content for this channel. So thank you for that support as well. As always, thank you for watching People of Process, and I hope this content helps you improve your own creative process.